How many of you have read this book already? Good, about half. Well, how many have read it only once? Very few. Somehow you sense when you read it the first time that there are depths to this book that rarely, if ever, emerge upon first reading. Great books are usually like that. They always reveal more on subsequent rereadings. They become clearer and at the same time profounder on each rereading. In fact, that's my definition of a great book. A great book is a book that rewards rereading. And this is one of them. It is almost certainly Lewis's greatest book. I would say it's one of the greatest novels ever written. Certainly one of the greatest novels of the 20th century. And one of the reasons it's Lewis's greatest book is that his wife helped him write it. I've written some 75 or so books, and one of them, only one of them, a publisher, when he got the book, said, "Hey, how come your style is so much better?" And the answer was, "That's the one book my wife helped me write." There was some critic, I'm not sure who it was, who had labeled Lewis a male chauvinist because of his picture of Jane in That Hideous Strength, which is certainly a sympathetic picture, but it's not a deep and profound and intuitively right picture. It's the picture to the back that we draw. And that critic, I'm not sure who it was, supposedly, I don't know if the story is apocryphal or not, read the manuscript of this without knowing that it was Lewis, and said, this couldn't have been written by a man. This must have been written by a woman, because the psychology of Orwell, the ugly woman who's the protagonist, couldn't possibly be understood by a man. Actually, most of Lewis's friends thought that his wife was quite ugly, although he didn't. Well, what I will do is take you a tour through this book. Instead of talking about it, I will go through it with you. That's, in my experience, the best way to teach a great book. People from places like New England make silly statements about places like Texas. And any Texan knows that to understand Texas, you have to be there, you have to live there, you have to go through it, rather than just talk about it, however intelligently. So, what I will do is very simple. I'll just pick out important passages and comment on them. But first, I should say something about the five main aspects of this story: the plot, the characters, the setting, the style, and the themes. The style is a very spare style, a much more clear, simple, and modernist kind of style. A style quite different from the style of either the Narnia Chronicles or the Space Trilogy, both of which are delightful to read, but if and only if you have a love affair with words. It's a semi-Chestertonian style. This instead is a style that's calculated to appeal to almost everyone, I think. It's clear and hard, like Greek sunlight. The setting is Rome, a pagan kingdom, probably in Macedonia, not too far from Athens, in pre-Christian times. The subtitle is A Myth Retold. Lewis's love of ancient mythology extended to Greek and Roman mythology, as well as Northern mythology, which he loved even better. And he viewed mythology in a much more, you might say, liberal or ecumenical way than most Christians did. He thought there was profound truth in it. He picked up on a statement by G.K. Chesterton, The Everlasting Man, which book, by the way, he credited more than any other that he ever read for his conversion, where Chesterton says, just as God prepared humanity for the incarnation by the Jewish prophets, and also, as many of the church fathers had, by the Greek philosophers, who were certainly not infallible, but nevertheless paved the way with profound truths. So there's the third stream of preparation for the gospel, than this ancient pagan mythology, which is even more compromised than Greek philosophy, but has profound gems of wisdom in it. How in the world did almost all cultures get this idea of a dying and rising God, and of God saving his people? In Norse mythology, it goes so far as to have Odin hanged from a tree, sacrificing himself to himself for the sins of his people. This is pre-Christian imagery. Quite amazing. In Paralandra, Ransom finds that what is myth on earth is fact in Paralandra. And then he realizes that earthly mythology is gleams of celestial beauty falling on jungles of filth and imbecility, because it's based on a solider reality than we think, but it's at a greater distance from its base. That's his notion of pagan myths. So his favorite myth, and what he thinks, I think rightly, is the most Christian of the Greek myths, is the myth of Cupid and Psyche. Psyche, the beautiful, holy woman whose face is as beautiful as her soul. In mythology, by the way, we almost always have the sacramental union of body and soul. In modern thought, we usually have a contrast between them. Beauty and the Beast is a more typically modern fairy tale. In an older fairy tale, a beautiful soul always manifests itself in a beautiful face. Well, Psyche, of course, means soul, and Cupid means love. So Lewis interprets this as an allegory of the ultimate nature of religion, the love affair between the God of love and the human soul. So this is a deeply religious book, and a deeply Christian book, even though it's purely pagan. And in fact, the issue of monotheism versus polytheism does not at all arise. Whatever is said about the gods, in the plural, which is what the pagans knew, could also be said about God. So you can transcribe the issues, the questions, the themes of this pagan book almost perfectly into a Christian and monotheistic context. The plot and the characters will emerge as we move through the story, especially the plot, so I will summarize the plot here. The main character, Oriol, is one of three sisters, princesses, fathered by a rather ugly and nasty king. And she's sort of in the middle between her younger sister, Redival, who is very beautiful but very shallow, and her sister, Psyche, who is very beautiful in both body and soul. In fact, people sometimes call her a goddess. And the relationship that Oriol has to all the characters defines the other characters. In other words, the reader understands each other character through Oriol's eyes, and therefore imperfectly. The danger and the drama of writing a book in the first person is that you do not have the truth. You do not have God's point of view. You have a fallible human being's point of view. So some things that the writer, protagonist says are correct and some are incorrect. So you have to sort of play God and not only evaluate the other characters from Oriol's point of view, but also evaluate Oriol from your point of view. So there's that double perspective in there that adds to the drama. That's a good technique of classical drama. You get that in the book of Job. What happens to Job is seen through God's eyes and through Job's eyes, and the contrast, the vertical contrast, is the main drama there. You also get that in typical Greek drama, in Oedipus the King, for instance. What Lycoris sees, what Tiresias sees, what Oedipus sees are the same events, but interpreted very differently. And you have to choose between them. Let me summarize what I think are the 6 main philosophical and theological themes in the book. And we'll see these recurring concretely in the plot. The first one is the nature of myth, the truth of myth and the falsehood of myth. The Greek myth of Cupid and Psyche, as we have it, is a version of this story. In fact, Lewis calls this story a myth retold. It is, in a broad sense, an allegory. Psyche is the human soul, and the god that she weds is the god of love. But it's not an allegory so much as a symbolism. It has reverberations. It doesn't have just one meaning, it has many. So the truth in mythology is one theme. A second is the theme of redemption, a very Christian theme. This is a much more hopeful kind of myth, a much more upbeat kind of myth than most, especially in Norse mythology, which Lewis loved above all, as did Tolkien, even though it's the most pessimistic of mythologies. In Norse mythology alone, the gods lose to the frost giants or the demons. Evil is stronger than good, and there's very little hope, although there's a tiny chink of hope at the end. Here we have, instead, a comedy, in the sense that it has a happy ending. Although, like a Dostoevsky story, you have to go through 900 pages of hell to get to 1 page of heaven. So there's the theme of redemption. A third theme is why religion is so mysterious and why faith is not rational. Why there's a contrast between holy places and clear places. One of the questions asked frequently by Orwell is, why must holy places be dark places? If there were no dark places in religion, you wouldn't need faith, you just need reason. And in heaven, you won't need faith. Faith and hope disappear, like the first 2 stages of the 3-stage rocket once you're in heaven, and all you need is love. But here, you absolutely need faith. Why? Bertrand Russell, on his deathbed, was visited by a preacher who said, Bertie, you're going to die in a few days. You've been a lifelong atheist, and you know the human mind is fallible, so you know you might be wrong, and you might find out that there is a God after all. Don't you think you'd better ask the question, what if I did meet God after death? What should I say to him? And Russell, very British, said, fair question, preacher. I suppose I should say to him, sir, respect and all, sir, evidently you do exist, and evidently my atheistic hypothesis was erroneous. Would you mind answering me one wee little question? Why the hell didn't you give us more evidence? Well, it's kind of funny, but it's a good question. Why doesn't God give us more evidence? He could zap every single one of us into the beatific vision right now. But he doesn't have a universal brain zapping policy. Why? Please, God, frontal lobotomy? No. No, you have to be in this veil of shadows. Why? Good question. Lou's got an answer to it. By the way, answers that novels give to profound theological questions are much more convincing, deep down, once you understand them, than any philosophical or theological argument could possibly be. I remember almost all of my life, I thought the idea, which I classified as a liberal, in a bad sense, idea of collective responsibility was a silly one. Only individuals make choices, therefore only individuals are responsible. And then I read Dostoevsky, and he convinced me that that wasn't true. He convinced me that there are no such things as victimless crimes, that we're all parts of each other. But no theologian could do that. Another issue that novels can do, that philosophy can't do, is fate and free will, or predestination and free will. How can you reconcile those two things? The clearer your concept of them, the more self-contradictory they seem. And yet every good story ever written convinces you that there is fate. It's not just random, that's not a good story. And unless there's free will, it's not a good story either. So you see the coincidence, the identity even, of fate and free will in stories, even though you can't understand it. So stories can do remarkable things in opening our eyes. A fourth problem, a very obvious problem, is the problem of evil. Why is there evil? Why is there injustice? Why must we suffer? What good is evil? If the gods have at least some sort of providential control of the world, why don't they make it better? And does anything good come out of the evil that is obviously permitted by divine predestination? A fifth theme is the nature of love and the difference between different kinds of loves. If you want to understand Lewis's psychological presuppositions about love that form a part of this book, read his book, The Four Loves. Each of the four loves, except for charity, can go bad or good. So Oriol is a deeply flawed character, but nevertheless a deeply loving character, and a character who is saved in the end, precisely through her love, even though it is a false and perverted love. It's a jealous love. But in order to have something perverted, you have to have aversion before there's a perversion. Corruptio optimi pessima. The corruption of the best things is the worst things. So when you find something really bad, which you do in Oriol, you also find something really good that it's a perversion of. So how do you sort that out? Finally, the theme of the role of reason and the irrational and the relation between the two. Lewis says in Surprised by Joy that before his conversion, the two hemispheres of his mind were in sharp contrast. On the one hand, a many-islanded sea of mysticism and myth and fairy tales. On the other hand, a glib and shallow scientific rationalism. And until he discovered Christ, nothing catalyzed those two things and brought them together. Well, Oriol has two main influences in her life, two main philosophical planes. One is the old priest, who Lewis would describe as something like minestrone soup. Dark and mysterious and heavy, but profound and nourishing. And then there is a philosopher named the Fox, who was a slave who was captured in war, and his life was spared because he surrendered. And he is the teacher of both Oriol and Psyche. And he's a good man and a reasonable man, but he's only a philosopher. At first I thought he was a disciple of Socrates, but I came to discover that he's really a Stoic. Stoic philosophers are rather strange because they almost always are highly moral, highly honorable, highly honest, and highly trustable. And at the same time, not only do they suppress their emotions, but they are suspicious of instinct and emotion and even of love. So the fox versus the priest symbolizes the rational versus, I'd say, the romantic or the mystical. How can you get those two things together? Oriol, at one point in the novel, confesses almost in the literal words of Lewis's own autobiography that the two halves of her life, symbolized by the fox and the priest, each were very strong but could not possibly get together. It was a very creative kind of schizophrenia. All right, with those themes in mind, let's just look at some of the events. The first event is similar to the one that precipitates the drama of Oedipus the King, which Aristotle says is the greatest drama ever written, and which many critics today say is still the greatest drama ever written, over 2,000 years later. That's a reasonable opinion. I would rank Hamlet even above Oedipus the King, but that's certainly up there. Interesting that in so many fields other than science, the ancients are profounder than the moderns. Has there ever been a philosopher who writes better than Plato? No. Why? He's the first philosopher whose complete books we have. And everybody after him is less than him. Don't know why. I suppose the answer to that question is we're all bedeviled by this idea of evolution, which may be true biologically, but I don't think is true spiritually. So what is great can only begin great. We're obsessed with acorns growing into oak trees, and we forget that all acorns come from oak trees. Anyway, like Oedipus the king, this begins with a curse. The land is under a curse. The river does not flow. The crops do not grow. Plague breaks out. And because the ancient sense of justice is so strong, primitive, and certainly not infallible, but nevertheless strong, therefore there's got to be some reason for it. The law of cause and effect. Nothing happens without a cause. Bad things have bad causes, good things have good causes. So somebody's to blame for this. Who? Let's find him and let's sacrifice him. Well, for ordinary emergencies, you sacrifice maybe plants or animals, or even expensive animals like rams or bulls. But for really great emergencies, you have to sacrifice the most precious thing, people. Almost all ancient religions had human sacrifice, at least as an emergency measure. And when in Genesis 22, God commanded Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, that was a temptation in the sense of, there's a word for this in Sanskrit. Hinduism has a category for it. It's called an upaya, a divine trick. A clever teaching device where God apparently says one thing and really means the opposite. Because according to the mainline Jewish and Christian tradition, the whole point of the Abraham and Isaac story comes in the end, that God does not want human sacrifice. When God said to Abraham, sacrifice Isaac, Abraham probably said, well, of course, this God is like all the pagan gods. This is the supreme test. Of course there's human sacrifice. Too bad it has to come on me, but okay, here we go. And the real surprise is not that God apparently wanted it, but that at the end God says, I forbid it. I'm going to establish a new religion in which, because man is made in my own image, a uniquely Jewish idea, by the way, no pagan has that notion. Because man is made in my image, he is sacred. Human life is sacred. No human sacrifice. Instead, you sacrifice animals. If you took a time machine and went back to the temple in Jesus' day or earlier, you'd think you were at a butcher shop. Because the main business there was the sacrifice of animals. But this won't work. The king offers the priest any number of animals, and the priest says, bulls and rams and goats will not win Ungit's favor. Ungit is the god of gloom. And she's very mysterious and apparently very ugly, and she's symbolized by a black faceless stone. But she's real and powerful and formidable. So you have to sacrifice to Ungit. Bulls and rams and goats will not win Ungit's favor while the land is impure, said the priest. I have served Ungit these 63 years, and I have learned one thing for certain. Her anger never comes upon us without cause, and it never ceases without expiation. Most modern people do not understand sacrifice. And they see ancient religions as simply crude and primitive because they waste things. They pour out the wine and they sacrifice animals, and people don't eat them, but they're given to the gods. Well, how silly. Not at all. The essence of all religion is sacrifice. At the heart of Christianity, we have the supreme sacrifice of the most precious victim. It's not rational. Holy places are not lay places, they're dark places. Ungit will be avenged, says the priest. It's not a bull or a ram that quiets her now. You mean she wants a man, says the king? Yes, said the priest, or a woman. And now the king trembles because he has 3 daughters. How is the offering made, said the king? It has never happened in my time. The victim, said the priest, must be given to the brute. Who is the brute? For the brute is, in a mystery, Ungit herself, or Ungit's son. And he is the god of the mountain, or he is all of these. Typical ancient pagan religion, things flow in and out of each other. The victim is led up the mountain to the holy tree, and bound to the tree, and left there. Then the brute comes. Well, you're probably thinking, oh, this is an allegory. The tree is the cross, and the root is Satan, and the victim is Christ. Well, it's not an allegory, but it's a symbolism. And it's a confused vision in pagan thought of the profoundest of Christian mysteries. That is why you angered Ungit just now, King, when you spoke of offering a thief. In the great offering, the victim must be perfect. For in the holy language, a man so offered is said to be Ungit's husband, and a woman is said to be the bride of Ungit's son. And both are called the brute's supper. And when the brute is Ungit, it lies with the man. And when it is her son, it lies with the woman. Either way, there is a devouring. Now, you look at these pictures, and it's like watching MTV. Boom, 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 boom. What's going on? It's not rational. But there's something profound there. Confused, but profound. Many different things are said, many sacred stories, many great mysteries. Some say the loving and the devouring are all the same thing. For in the sacred language, we say that a woman who lies with a man devours the man. That's why sexual intercourse is called in French le petit mal or le grand mal. It's a kind of death. That is why you are so wide of the mark, King, when you think a thief or an old worn-out slave or a coward taken in battle would do for the great offering. The best in the land is not too good for this office. At this point, the fox, who is the king's slave, the reliable philosopher, speaks out. Master, let me speak. Speak on, said the king. Do you not see, master, said the fox, that the priest is talking nonsense? A shadow brute is to be an animal, which is also a goddess, which is also a god, and loving is to be eating. A child of sex can talk more sense. And a moment ago, the victim of this abominable sacrifice was to be the accursed, the wickedest person in the whole land, offered as a punishment. Now it is said to be the best person in the whole land, the perfect victim, married to the god as a reward. Ask him which he means. It can't be both. Is the fox right or not? Well, it depends on how deeply you understand Christianity. If you don't understand it very deeply, you say, of course the fox is right. It's perfectly logical. If you don't understand it, you say, everything here is true. The priest replies, we are hearing much Greek wisdom this morning, King, and I have heard most of it before. I did not need a slave to teach it to me. It is very subtle, but it brings no rain and grows no corn. Sacrifice does both. It does not even give them boldness to die. That Greek there is your slave, because in some battle he threw down his arms and let them bind his hands and lead him away and sell him, rather than take a spear thrust in his heart. Very rational thing to do, but not very courageous. Much less does it give them understanding of holy things. They demand to see such things clearly, as if the gods were no more than letters written in a book. I, King, have dealt with the gods for 3 generations of men, and I know that they dazzle our eyes and flow in and out of one another like eddies on a river, and nothing that is said clearly can be said truly about them. Holy places are dark places. It is life and strength, not knowledge and words, that we get in them. Holy wisdom is not thin and clear like water, but thick and dark like blood. I remember when I first read this is a very compromising confession, that I thought, oh, the fox is obviously my hero and the priest is a fool. And this makes no sense at all, and the fox is going to triumph over the priest in the end, and light is going to cover this darkness. And then, as I reread it a second and third time, I realized, oops, it's the opposite. Lewis is writing this book to foxes like us, and he's trying to rehabilitate the priest. And he's doing it in a very clever way, but because at first the priest is not a very attractive character. He's very barbaric. But as the story progresses, you realize that his wisdom, though flawed and in need of light and correction, is quite much profounder than the fox's. Orwell realizes at this point that since the victim must be perfect, that's going to be Psyche, the most beautiful and pure person in the kingdom. And she loves Psyche, truly, truly does love Psyche more than anyone else in the world. So she courageously offers to stand in for Psyche in her place. The king, who doesn't really love either of his daughters, doesn't much care, doesn't want any of his possessions to die, but when Oriol offers to stand in for her sister, she says, "Father, it is fit that one should die for the people. Give me to the brute instead of Istra." Istra is another name for Psyche. The king, without a word, came up to me, took me by the wrist, and led me the whole length of the room to where his great mirror hung. He stood before me, and we saw our two selves side by side. "Ungit asked the best in the land as her son's bride," he said, "and you'd give her that?" Oriol is very ugly, almost spectacularly ugly. And her ugliness of face, number one, symbolizes an ugliness in her soul, and number two is nevertheless redeemable, and number three is going to be the very agent of her redemption. Her sister Psyche speaks to the priest privately and comes back to Oriol, and now she's calm. She realizes that she has to die, and she says something that Oriol doesn't understand. "The priest has been with me, Oriol. I never knew him before. He is not what the fox thinks he is. Do you know, sister, I've come to feel more and more that the fox doesn't have the whole truth. Oh, he has much of it. It would be dark as a dungeon within me but for his teaching. Yet, I can't say it properly. He calls the whole world a city. He's a cosmopolitan, which literally means the cosmos, the whole universe is your city. Yes, but what's the city built on? There's earth beneath. And what's outside the city walls? Doesn't all the food come from there, as well as all the dangers? Things growing and rotting, strengthening and poisoning, things shining wet. In one way, more like the house of Ungit. "Yes, Ungit," said I. "Doesn't the whole land smell of her? Do you and I need to flatter gods anymore? They're tearing us apart. How shall I bear it? What worse can they do? Of course the fox is wrong. He knows nothing about Ungit. He thought too well of the world. He thought there were no gods. Or else, the fool, that the gods were better than men. It never entered his mind, he was too good, to believe that the gods are real and viler than the vilest men." Well, that's better than atheism. To believe there are gods who are evil. At least that's to believe there are gods, and that there's a struggle between good and evil that goes all the way up or all the way down. Or perhaps, said Psyche, that there are real gods, but they don't really do those evil things. Might it not be that those things that seem so evil are not what they seem to be? What if I am indeed to marry a god? This makes Oriol even angrier, because although she does not admit it, her love of Psyche is the whole meaning of her life, and she is jealous. "Oh," said Psyche, "I see. You think the brute devours the offering. Well, I suppose I think so myself. Anyway, it means death, Oriol. You didn't think I was such a child as not to know that. How can I be the ransom for all of Rome unless I die? And if I am to go to the god, of course it must be through death. That way, even what is strangest in the holy sayings may be true. To be eaten and to be married to the god might not be so different. There must be much that neither the priest nor the fox knows." When she says to be eaten, she's not just thinking of her body, because the ancients didn't usually have, except for the Platonists, a clear distinction between the body and the soul. So this is a profoundly mystical truth. Our ultimate destiny is to die. That is, for the ego to die, for it to give itself up, and then for God to come and take its place. Not in a pantheistic way, but as Christ says, only that which dies can be resurrected. If you want to save your life, you have to lose it. If you grasp onto your life, You won't save it. You'll lose it. She goes on to Oriol. By the way, the events in the plot of the story are minimal. Most of the drama is in the interpretation of the events. It's an interior drama. In that way, it's very much like a Dostoevsky story. Oriol, we have made so little use of the fox's teaching if we're to be scared by death. And you know, sister, he has sometimes let out that there were other Greek masters than those that he follows himself who have taught that death opens a door out of a little dark room, that's all the life we've known before, into a great real place where the true sun shines and we shall meet. I wailed, cruel, cruel, is it nothing to you that you will leave me here alone, Psyche? Did you ever love me at all? You see the childish jealousy coming out here. I love you. Why, Maya, it's her pet name. Maya, what have I ever had to love save you and the fox? But to lose you, Maya, and to lose the fox, and to lose one's maidenhead, and to bear a child, these are all deaths. Indeed, Oriol, I am not sure that this death which I go to is not the best of all. I must tell you something, Oriol, which I never told to anyone, not even to you. I have always, at least ever since I can remember, had a kind of longing for death. I said, Psyche, have I made you so little happy as that? No, no, she said, you don't understand, not that kind of longing. It was when I was happiest that I longed the most. It was on happy days when we were up there in the hills, the three of us, with the wind and the sunshine, when you couldn't see the palace. Remember the color and the smell of looking across at the gray mountains in the distance? And because it was so beautiful, it set me longing, always longing. Somewhere else there must be more of it. Everything seemed to be saying, Psyche, come. But I couldn't come, not yet, and I didn't know where I was to come to. It hurt me. I felt like a bird in a cage when the other birds are flying home. Now, those of you who know Lewis recognize this as Lewis's signature theme, Sehnsucht. The mysterious longing, Augustine's restless heart for that which cannot be defined, and that which cannot be fully attained in this life. The thing that, though it is a hunger, is better than any other food. Though it's a failure, is better than any other success. And Oriol doesn't understand this at all. Psyche goes on, the sweetest thing in all my life has been this longing to reach the holy mountain, to find the place where all the beauty came from. Oriol replies, that was the sweetest thing in your life? How cruel you are. Your heart is not of iron, it isn't of stone. But she went on, my country, the place I ought to have been born. Do you think that all meant nothing? All the longing for home? For now it feels not like going, but like returning. All my life, the God of the mountain has been wooing me. Oh, look up once at least before the end and wish me joy. I am going to my lover. Do you not see? I only see that you have never loved me, said I. It may well be you are going to the gods. You are becoming cruel like them. All right, there's the central dramatic conflict within Oriol between her love and her hate, which she mistakes for love, her jealousy. She is, of course, idolizing Psyche. Though Psyche loves Oriol, she does not idolize Oriol, she loves the god, however unknown and mysterious the god may be. Oriol, on the other hand, since she does not love the god, idolizes Psyche. Well, she is taken and offered, left at the tree, and the next day they see that she is not there, so everyone assumes that she has been killed by something. Oriol seeks comfort from the fox. And he rationalizes it. He said, what happened is all part of the same web which is called nature, or the whole. That southwest wind came over 1,000 miles of sea and land. The weather of the whole world would have had to have been different from the beginning if that wind was not to blow. It's all one web. You can't pick threads out nor put them in. his fate, it's his necessity. That's his philosophy. But since he loved Psyche, after he gives this philosophy, he weeps. Then his love got the better of his philosophy, and he pulled his mantle over his head, and still weeping left me. When he came back next day, he said, "You saw yesterday how little progress I have made in philosophy." Now it's just the opposite. One of the most impressive things that this world has ever seen were the very tears of God. What does God think about our sufferings? Read the shortest verse of the Bible. Jesus wept. Well, Oriole has to find out what happened to Psyche. So she goes to the forbidden place, the holy valley, taking along her trusted friend, the warrior Bardia, who is forbidden to and afraid to enter the holy place. And there they see Psyche, standing just across a little river. They can almost touch her. And Oriole can cross the river because she's a princess, Bardia can't. So this looks like, the tragedy becomes a happy ending, and we're only not even halfway through the story. What happens? Psyche tells Oriole what happened. The god came out of the wind, and I saw him, saw whom? The west wind. Saw it? Not it, him, the god of the wind, west wind himself. Psyche, were you awake or were you dreaming? Oh, this was no dream. One can't dream things like that, because one's never seen things like that. He was in human shape, but you couldn't mistake him for a mere man. Oh, sister, you'd understand if you'd only seen him. How can I make you understand? You've seen lepers? Of course. Well, you know how healthy people look next to a leper? You mean healthier, ruddier than ever? Yes. Now, we, beside the gods, are like lepers beside us. You mean the god was so red and ruddy? She laughed and clapped her hands. Oh, it's no use, she said. I've not given you the idea of it at all. Never mind. You shall see the god for yourself, Oriole. It must be so. I'll make it so. There must be a way. Look, this may help you. When I saw west wind, I was neither glad nor afraid. I felt ashamed. Ashamed? What of it? They hadn't stripped her naked. No, Maya. Ashamed of looking like a mortal. Ashamed of being a mortal. But how could you help that? Don't you think the things people are most ashamed of are the things they can't help? I thought of my own ugliness and said nothing. And then the god brought me into his house. You could see it was the god's house at once. I don't mean a temple where a god is worshipped. I mean a god's house where he lives. I would not for any wealth have dared to gone into it, but I had to, Oriole, for there came a voice, sweet, oh, sweeter than any music. Yet my hair rose up at it too. Do you know, Oriole, what it said? It said, enter your house. Yes, it called it my house. Enter, Psyche, bride of the god. Psyche, said I, leaping up, I can't bear this any longer. You've told me so many wonders. If this is all true, I've been wrong all my life. That's a very hard thing to admit, the W word. If any of you are fans of old TV sitcoms, remember the Happy Days episode where Fonzie, who's very cool, has to admit that he was wrong to Ralph Mouth, who's a real nerd. Ralph, I can't say that word, it's not cool. Can't get that. That's one of Oriole's biggest problems. Everything has to be begun over again. Psyche, is it true? You're not playing a game with me? Show me your palace. Of course I will, she said, rising. Let us go in. And don't be afraid, whatever you see or hear. Is it far from here, said I? She gave me a quick, astonished look. Far to where, she said. To the palace, to this god's house. Perhaps you've seen a lost child in a crowd run up to a woman whom it takes for its mother, and how the woman turns around and shows the face of a stranger, and then that look in the child's eyes. Silent for a moment before it begins to cry. Psyche's face was like that, checked, blank. Happy assurance suddenly dashed to pieces. Oriole, she said, trembling, what do you mean? Maine, said I, where is the palace? How far have we go to reach it? She gave a loud cry. Then with white face staring hard into my eyes, she said, this is it, Oriol. It is here. You are standing on the stairs of the great gate. Oriol cannot see the palace. Here's a test. A number of readers, maybe a quarter, among my students, that's my estimate, think that the palace is just in Oriol's mind. The other 3/4 think that it is real and she simply can't see it. I think that's a test of how much faith you have. Oh, Maya, you can't see it. For you, it is not there at all. Oh, I am so sorry. I came almost to a full belief. She was shaking and stirring me a dozen different ways, but I had not shaken her at all. She was as certain of her palace as of the plainest thing, as certain as the priest had been of Ungit when my father's dagger was between his ribs. Courage. I was as weak beside her as the fox was beside the priest. This valley was indeed a dreadful place. There might be 100 things in it that I could not see. Can a Greek understand the horror of that thought? Years after, I dreamed again and again that I was in some well-known place, the pillar room in our palace, and everything I saw was different from what I touched. In the dream, I would lay my hand on the table and feel warm hair instead of smooth wood, and the corner of the table would shoot out a hot, wet tongue to lick me. And I knew by the mere taste of them that all those dreams came from that moment when I believed I was looking at Psyche's palace and did not see it. For the horror was the same, a sickening